Do you need a dopamine detox? So in recent years, the concept of dopamine detoxing has gained significant traction, particularly in tech-savvy circles, biohacking communities, and people just looking to improve themselves on social media platforms. This trend promises to reset our brains, freeing us from the clutches of modern-day addictions and allowing us to once again enjoy life's simpler pleasures and give a big boost in motivation and productivity. But is there any scientific merit to this practice, or is it just another silly fad like many other things going around today? So let's dive into the world of dopamine, exploring what it really does in our brains and whether a detox is truly beneficial. So to understand the concept of dopamine detoxing, we first need to understand what dopamine actually is and how it functions in our brains. So contrary to popular belief, dopamine isn't simply a pleasure chemical that makes us feel good. Its role is a lot more nuanced and complex. So dopamine acts as a bridge between our expectations and our experiences. Throughout our lives, we learn various cause and effect relationships. For example, we learn that fire can burn us, studying leads to better exam results, and a good night's sleep results in feeling more awake and energetic throughout the day. So this learning process can be divided into two stages: expectation and experience. So when our experience exceeds our expectations, dopamine is going to be released. And on the flip side, if our experience falls short of our expectations, we experience a drop in dopamine release. But dopamine does more than just signal this difference. It also helps us learn from these experiences and update our expectations in the future. So as I'm sure you understand with the fire analogy, this learning mechanism is crucial for survival and adaptation. It allows us to navigate our environment more effectively, make decisions based on past experiences and anticipated outcomes. However, this same mechanism can sometimes lead to problematic behaviors, especially in our modern world filled with hyper-stimulating experiences. For example, you can have an increase in dopamine in response to junk food or doom scrolling on social media before bed, and you'll also have that dopamine boost before you even do the task that motivates you to engage in that bad behavior. So what does the dopamine detox trend claim? So the concept of a dopamine detox typically involves temporarily eliminating all sources of pleasure or stimulation from one's life for a pretty set period. Usually it's 24 hours, sometimes a little bit longer, going into weeks or months. So this might be abstaining from social media, digital devices, video games, music, highly palatable foods, and just various things like that. So in extreme cases, even social interaction could be cut out as well. So proponents of this practice claim that by depriving ourselves from these dopamine triggering activities, we can essentially reset our brain's reward system. They argue that after a detox period, we'll emerge with a renewed ability to appreciate life's simpler pleasures and have a significant boost in motivation, free from the constant need for intense stimulation. Honestly, this idea sounds pretty appealing, especially in a world where many of us feel overwhelmed by constant notifications, endless scrolling, and the pressure to always be on, essentially. But the real question is, does science support these claims? So while the intention behind dopamine detoxing isn't entirely misguided, the practice itself is based on some misconceptions about how dopamine works in our brains. So let's break down some of the key issues. So first, dopamine isn't just about pleasure. As I've already mentioned, dopamine is involved in learning and expectation setting, not just experiencing pleasure. So it's going to play a role in numerous brain functions, including movement as well, executive function, motivation, planning, and even things like breastfeeding as well. Trying to detox from dopamine would be like trying to detox from thinking or moving. Just not going to happen. So next principle, a 24-hour detox isn't enough to rewire your brain. So the brain's reward system and the habits we form around highly stimulating activities don't just develop overnight, and they cannot be undone in one day. It's kind of like a diet. You will not lose all the fat from all the Oreos you ate 2 years ago. It's not gonna happen in a day. So while taking a break from some of these certain activities might give you some time to reflect on your habits, it's not actually altering your brain chemistry in any significant way. And some people go on for much longer than 24 hours, but for most people trying to live a normal life, not really realistic or sustainable unless you're like a hermit living in the woods or something. And I don't believe the benefits to be worth it anyway. And so the problem isn't too much dopamine. The issue with modern addictive behaviors isn't that we have too much dopamine in our brains, rather it's that our reward systems have become dysregulated. So our expectations have been skewed by constant access to hyperstimulating activities, making it harder to find satisfaction in simpler activities. And with that, dopamine isn't something that you need to detox from. Dopamine is a crucial neurotransmitter that our brains need to function properly. So the goal isn't to necessarily eliminate dopamine, but to restore a healthy balance in our reward systems. So to better understand why the concept of dopamine detoxing has gained such popularity in the last decade, it's worth examining how our modern lifestyle interacts with our brain's reward system. So as I mentioned, in today's world, we're constantly bombarded with stimuli designed to capture your attention, trigger dopamine release. You know them all: social media platforms, video games, even our smartphones are engineered to provide intermittent reinforcement, a pattern of rewards that are known to be particularly addictive. So each notification, like, or level up provides a small dopamine hit, creating a cycle where we're constantly seeking that next bit of stimulation. And over time, this can lead to a state where we need more and more and more stimulation to feel the same level of satisfaction or reward. It literally is like a drug, essentially. And this kind of highlights the concept of doom scrolling. Each scroll of your phone on a website or social media platform is going to be a small dopamine hit. So this is where the idea of dopamine detoxing actually comes from. The belief that by cutting ourselves off from these sources of stimulation, we can break this cycle and reset our sensitivity to dopamine. But as we've discussed, it is not that simple. So if not detoxing, then what should we do? So while the concept of dopamine detox as typically described may not be the most scientifically sound, there is value in being mindful of our relationship with highly stimulating activities. So here are some evidence-based approaches that can actually help you, coming from a guy that studied neuroscience in undergrad, not an actual credential, just studied it a long time ago, probably forgot all the things anyway. Anyway, one is practicing moderation and mindful engagement. So instead of completely cutting out pleasurable activities, try to engage with them a little bit more mindfully. Set boundaries on when you use your social media, when you play video games, or other potentially addicting activities. Just be present and aware when you do engage these activities rather than using them as a mindless escape. And this highlights the power of just being bored. Being bored is okay. It is going to be great for dopamine motivation. Most great ideas and solved problems actually come from being bored and letting your mind wander a little bit. This is kind of like the concept of shower thoughts, or why you get good ideas and feel rejuvenated after a walk in nature. And the bigger main principle is just to cultivate delayed gratification. So research has shown that dopamine is involved in delayed gratification, the ability to wait longer for a larger reward than taking a smaller, more immediate. So interestingly, the anticipation of a reward can produce dopamine release similar to actually receiving the reward. So by practicing delayed gratification, you can actually train your brain to find satisfaction in the process of working towards goals and not just the immediate reward. And my basic mantra can apply here. I think I got this one from Naval Ravikant. So when confronted with two options, pick the one that is more painful in the short term. This is going to teach you delayed gratification, gets you more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And of course, with this all, you just have to explore some natural dopamine boosters. So certain activities can create long-lasting, stable increases in dopamine without the peaks and crashes associated with addictive behaviors. So some examples are cold water exposure. For example, this one has been shown to create a prolonged dopamine response. This could be achieved by doing a nice bath in your backyard, breaking the ice with a hammer or something, even cold showers, or even a cool bath if you don't have access to very cold water. And of course, there are plenty of other natural dopamine boosters: exercise, eating healthy, quality time with loved ones, spending time in the sun or nature, or just getting something done that you were putting off, and many, many more. It's just think about healthy habits. Those are probably natural dopamine boosters. So essentially, I want you to think about what the ideal 2.0 version of you is doing in a perfect world. A lot of those are going to be some natural dopamine boosters. But even then, you can take periodic breaks from highly stimulating activities. And while a 24-hour detox may not rewire your brain, taking some regular breaks from highly stimulating activities could be pretty beneficial for overall. So some things that you could do, one of them could be having a screen-free day once a week, or setting aside a time each day to engage in quieter, less stimulating activities like reading, meditation, or spending time in nature or with a friend or a loved one. And of course, you have to address the underlying issues here. So often excessive engagement with highly stimulating activities is a symptom of underlying stress, anxiety, or some other mental health issues. So addressing the root causes through therapy, stress management techniques, or even just a general lifestyle change could be much more effective than just detoxing from dopamine. And you probably got this point already, but most of dopamine detoxing really is just learning to remove bad habits. Address the bad habits, replace them with the good ones is the basic mantra here. But if you can't get there right away, you should just gradually reduce dependency in highly stimulating activities. So instead of just sudden drastic changes, try gradually reducing your engagement with these activities that you feel overly dependent on. So this could be setting time limits on your phone, using app blockers, finding alternative activities to fill your time, and various techniques like that. But one thing I do find interesting is the role of dopamine in addiction and recovery of both drugs and just generally bad habits. So I think understanding dopamine's role in addiction can provide some valuable insights into why some activities could be problematic and how we can actually approach recovery. So there's a psychiatrist named Dr. Anna Lemke. She's an addiction expert as well. She's done some extensive work in this area. She was on the Huberman Lab podcast where she shared some pretty insightful thoughts. So in addiction, whether to substance or behaviors, the initial highs become harder to achieve over time. And as I touched on earlier, this is because repeated exposure to high levels of dopamine can lead to downregulation of dopamine receptors. So as a result, activities that were once thought to be pleasurable may eventually just feel necessary to avoid discomfort. So this understanding supports the idea that taking breaks from highly stimulating activities can be beneficial overall. So it allows time for your dopamine receptors to potentially upregulate, making us feel a little bit more sensitive to natural rewards. However, this process takes time. It's not going to be 24 hours. And it's just one part of addressing addictive behaviors. So Dr. Lemke's work suggests that for individuals struggling with addiction, a period of abstinence altogether can be helpful, or just replacing it with good habits. So this is going to be very different from the concept of a dopamine detox as typically prescribed. So it's targeted approach to a specific problematic behavior, not just the general purging of all pleasurable activities. And I always talk about this in every single video, the importance of balance. So it's crucial to remember that dopamine, like all neurotransmitters, plays multiple roles in your body. It's not inherently good or inherently bad. It really is just about having that balance between both sides. So what works for one person, again, may not work for another person. So it's important to approach any changes in your lifestyle or habits with care and in consideration for your own individual circumstances. And if you are struggling with what feels like addiction or certain activities or substances, always best to talk to someone, get some help, healthcare professional, therapist, whoever it might be, they got you covered on that. And as we get towards the end of the video, I want to talk about the neuroscience of habit formation and overall change. So to further understand why simple detoxes aren't likely to create a lasting change, it's helpful to look at the neuroscience of actual habit formation. So habits are formed through a process called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to form new neural connections and pathways. So when we repeatedly engage in behavior, especially one that's rewarding, our brain is going to strengthen those neural pathways associated with that behavior. Really, your brain's goal here is to make that behavior easier and more automatic over time. So breaking a habit, therefore, isn't just about willpower, it's about weakening the established neural pathways and forming new ones. So again, this is going to take some time, consistent effort. A 24-hour break may give you a fresh perspective, but it's not enough to fundamentally rewire your brain. Instead, lasting change comes from consistently choosing alternative behaviors and giving your brain time to form new, healthier pathways. Dopamine is also related to stress as well, but it's also worth noting the relationship between stress and dopamine as well. So chronic stress can actually lead to increased dopamine release in some parts of the brain, which might partly explain why we often turn to highly stimulating activities when we're stressed. Me, I'm a stress eater. I'm gonna go for something sugary or sweet or fatty, so that's gonna be my behavior. However, the stress-induced dopamine release can further dysregulate our reward system, making it harder to find pleasure in just the everyday healthy activities. And this creates a pretty vicious cycle, where stress leads to seeking out more intense stimulation, which can then increase stress levels, and it's a cycle from there. Don't wanna be there. This understanding highlights the importance of stress management and maintaining just a healthy relationship with overall rewarding activities. And of course, this goes back to the basics. Techniques like meditation, exercise, sleep can help regulate stress levels and by extension help maintain a more balanced dopamine system. So again, while a one-day dopamine detox isn't necessarily going to reset your brain, there may be some benefits to periodically abstaining from these certain activities. So this practice sometimes may be referred to as like a dopamine fast, although the term isn't really too scientifically accurate. So some of the potential benefits of these periodic breaks include increased self-awareness. So like taking a break from habitual activities can help you become more aware of your patterns and your triggers. Another thing you may get is some improved focus. So reducing distractions, even temporarily, can help you with concentration and productivity. And of course, as I mentioned, there's going to be a big stress reduction component. So even just stepping away from constant stimulation can be relaxing and help reduce your overall stress levels. And really, I think one of the biggest things is just giving you some time for reflection on what you're doing throughout your day. These breaks can give you valuable time for introspection, give you some time to set goals. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, just give yourself some time to be bored. And of course, you want to appreciate the simpler pleasures. So by temporarily removing intense stimuli, you may find some renewed enjoyment in simpler activities. But it is important to approach these fasts with realistic expectations. As I mentioned, these aren't going to fundamentally alter your brain chemistry overnight, but they can be a useful tool for self-reflection and just habit adjustment overall. So while the concept of dopamine detoxing has captured public imagination, the reality of dopamine's role in the brain is much more complex than this trend suggests. Basically, overall, instead of seeking quick fixes or extreme measures, we're best served by cultivating a pretty balanced approach to all of life's pleasures and challenges. By understanding how dopamine actually works in our brains, we can make more informed choices about how we engage with these highly stimulating activities. We want to learn to find satisfaction in delayed gratification, explore some natural pathways and natural activities to support our brain's reward system, and gradually build habits that promote overall well-being. And remember, there are no magic bullets when it comes to human behavior and brain function. Our actions and feelings are going to be influenced by a complex interplay of neurochemical, psychological, and environmental factors. So you got to approach this all with some curiosity, some skepticism, and just a willingness to engage in some scientific understanding. And by then, we could move beyond some simplistic trends towards more effective, sustainable ways of managing our relationship with pleasure and reward in the modern world. So the goal isn't to entirely eliminate dopamine or pleasure from our lives, but to create a balanced lifestyle where we can actually enjoy a full range of experiences without becoming overly dependent on any one source of stimulation. So to summarize, this might involve setting boundaries with technology, cultivating meaningful relationships, engaging in fulfilling work or hobbies, and just taking care of your own physical and mental health. Find that balanced, satisfying lifestyle. No extreme detox is required here. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it was helpful for you on the concept of dopamine detoxing, and make sure you drop a like and subscribe if you're not already, and I'll catch you in the next one.